don't wait for the next breakthrough. Don't be worrying about where this new technology is going to come from. The focus needs to be on the business problems that you are trying to solve and how you organizationally can incrementally improve your capability consistently. The consistency of the improving of your capabilities is what's ultimately going to make the difference.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Engati CX. I'm your host Kingshuk, and we are really glad to have all of you join us today. On this show, we talk to CX and technology experts from around the world. We explore, uncover, and share fresh insights on creating experiences that your customers will remember and look forward to. Now, a brief introduction about our platform Engati. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code digital CX platform available across 14 channels with 45,000 solutions created across 186 countries in pretty much every domain and for every use case that can be possible. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc. magazine, Tech World, CIO magazine, and a lot of others as such. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 400,000 visitors annually. And now for our guest, Charles Araujo. Very welcome to our show, Charles.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Great. For our audience, a brief introduction about Charles. He's the founder of the Institute for Digital Transformation and a best-selling author as well. His first book, The Quantum Age of IT, Why Everything You Know About IT Is to Change, helped enterprise IT teams understand the macro trends, changing their role within the enterprise, as well as helping them to reinvent themselves so that they could lead their organizations into the future. He is also an international keynote speaker and a technology industry analyst, focused on helping organizations reset, reimagine their future, as well as reinvent themselves for the digital era and what he calls as the new human age. So we are glad to have you on our show and really excited to have the discussion forward.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So Charles, you have been working on digital transformation for a long time and with a lot of businesses as such. So why don't we start from the very basics and just help us understand what do you exactly mean by digital transformation? What does it mean for our business leaders and maybe some tools that people can use to accelerate?
This is probably one of the things that has bugged me for a very long time in that, when I started talking about digital transformation, it seems like eons ago. It was only actually 6 or 7 years ago now. And people really weren't using the term very much yet. And since then, it has become, one of the uber buzzwords of our time here. And it's just been co-opted by everybody to mean almost anything they want. And part of the challenge is it's this very broad idea. But when I first sort of landed here, I didn't think of it in terms of technology. What I really sort of landed on was this idea that we are entering this new time and space. I call it the digital era. There's a couple of different terms out there, but that it's a period in which the fundamental ways that organizations are structured, managed, and led are in fact changing, that it's underpinned by technology, but that it's really about this broader business transformation that was occurring. And so that's where I started about, like I said, 6 or 7 years ago. But what's interesting is over the last few years, I've started to crystallize what that means. And so when people ask me what digital transformation is all about today, what I'm really telling them is that as we've made this transition out of the industrial age and into the digital era, there was this fundamental shift that occurred, right? What precipitated all of this business transformation? And what it was is that there was a fundamental shift in the nature of value creation. And what I mean is that in the industrial age, the way we created value was basically through optimization. You were delivering a mass product to a mass market. And so therefore, the way you generated value was to optimize that process as much as possible. And so many things, almost the entire IT industry, things like Lean and Six Sigma, all came out of this idea of how could you optimize that process and therefore increase efficiency. And basically all of that money that was saved dropped to the bottom line as value. And so you can look across the expanse of organizations that were leading throughout the industrial age, and fundamentally their great expertise was in optimization, building these incredibly optimized supply chains. what we found in the last decade or so is that, all this talk about digital disruption, what it really came down to is that these disruptive entities were not out optimizing their industrial age competitors. What they were doing was they were transforming the nature of the customer experience. They were creating new ways for their customers to interact with them that they liked better. And optimization sort of became the price of admission, the ticket to the dance. But it was really about how you created this differentiated experience that was, in fact, the driver of value. And so that has led to us creating at the Institute what we're calling the digital experience supply chain, this idea that as that nature of value creation has shifted, we have to reorient our organizations to create and sustain that differentiated experience. And so you're continually transforming the experience, which drives you to continually transform your business models, which drives you to continually transform your operating models that support those business models, and then ultimately drives you to continually transform your work and management models to support these new operating models. And because customers are fickle and constantly being introduced to new ideas, this is a never-ending iterative cycle where the experiential demands are continually shifting, which means we're in this continual state of organizational transformation top to bottom. So when I talk about digital transformation, that's what it is. And it's frankly why some people struggle with it, because it is, bigger than a bread box. It's a whole lot more than just implementing some new technology and going, oh, back off our box, we did digital transformation. So, that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a great perspective to have it. And definitely, I would agree that the change is across a lot of functions. And as you said rightly, it's not a switch that can be turned on or a checkbox that can be ticked, right? So, yeah, I mean, everybody wants to get into the bandwagon, but I guess a lot of people struggle there as well. So on that front, what do you think, or what do you identify as some of the obstacles that organizations face when they do really want to transform or adopt the modern age digital technologies, but are for some reason unable to, even though the intent is there?
Yeah, well, so first of all, the first step is, it's sort of like a 12-step program. The first step is acknowledging that you have a problem, right? Acknowledging that you are subject to disruption, that you have to change. This is not some little incremental change that you're going to be embarking upon, that this has to be a much more fundamental transformation, right? I think that's the first step. But once you get to that point, you're right, is even with the intention, or even with this idea that, yeah, we have to do this, organizations and leaders in particular run into a few stumbling blocks. And I used to say there's really one. I actually would argue now there's two, and I'll talk about them briefly. The very first one, and then probably the most important, is the cultural transformation. As I said, too many people view digital transformation as a technology project. First and foremost, I would argue that there's really, digital transformation is three separate but tightly intercoupled transformations that occur. And in priority, it is first and foremost a cultural transformation. The second thing is it's an organizational or a structural transformation. And then only last is it a technology or technical transformation. But to execute a digital transformation successfully, you need to address all three. So I think that where people run into the biggest challenge is they almost ignore the first two. And of all of them, they ignore the cultural transformation the most. They pretend, or I don't know, don't know entirely the reason why, but they just do not give nearly enough credence or emphasis to the fact that this is a massive amount of change, and that as humans, we're naturally resistant to change, at least when that change is being thrust upon us. Right. Because, and it's not that, people, I think, misinterpret that to say that we don't like to change. Well, that's not true. That's why we see lines around the block when Apple introduces a new product. People love to change as long as it's going to benefit them and they're controlling it. What we hate is change that introduces uncertainty, that we don't know what that's going to mean, especially when the stakes are high, like when we're talking about our jobs and our careers. And so the biggest thing is to start digital transformation with a cultural focus. And how are you going to change and kind of win over the hearts and minds of your employees? And that really starts with setting this vision, what I call the why this, why now statement, that you are bringing them along, where you're crafting this vision for the future that basically leaves no room for doubt that where you're standing at today isn't going to be sufficient, and you're going to have to move. Right? The burning platform kind of idea that you have to move forward towards this new space, but they have to be able to see themselves in this vision. So that's the first thing. I actually built an entire methodology around that sort of organizational transformation and cultural transformation built around that. The second thing that I've sort of appreciated a little bit more recently, as I put on my industry analyst hat, is that enterprise leaders are struggling with what I call the tsunami of technology landing on their shores, meaning there's just this wave and wave and wave of brand new technologies. And most enterprise leaders are not actually spending most of their time looking at all this technology. And, they're focused on their internal business challenges. And so the second thing is you need a mechanism to sort that out quickly and rapidly, to be able to identify which of these technologies you can cobble together and assemble in a way that creates some kind of competitive advantage for your organization. And working with all the different tech vendors out there, generally speaking, most of them are good. It's not that they're and bad technology and it's about part and saying, oh, they're the best. Most of the time, it's not about best. It's about fitting it into what your business challenges are and how you can connect those dots and assemble this problems. And so I think we spend way too much time comparing technologies to one another when what we really need to be doing as enterprise leaders is focusing on the business problem and driving that through and saying, what are the various technology sets that are going to help me solve it? And so I think these are the two big obstacles that people have to overcome. And if they can overcome these two, then they set themselves up to execute transformational efforts very effectively.
Correct. That's very insightful, Charles. I think it's also about the mindset, as you mentioned, that it cannot be just fitted into existing cultural or organizational factors and structure. And really, it needs to be an overall across the board as such.
Yeah, well, and to that point, just really quick, I think what's interesting is what I sort of maybe even missed in that is that tsunami of technologies includes the stuff they've already invested in that already is in-house. I think the other thing is people tend to think of digital transformation means like all new, and it's like, no, it means figuring out how to put this together where you're melding, because there's massive investments and there's massive data structures and there's all of these assets that have to be interwoven. And so it's about looking at all of that holistically from a business value context.
Absolutely. So Charles, since you mentioned that obviously there is a tsunami of new technology and trends around us and sort of encompassing us. So would you spend some time sharing the secret of which particular ones do business leaders or technology leaders need to focus on, or how should they approach that as such?
Well, as I mentioned, I don't think it's about any, secret technology that's out there. That said, I think that there are probably some technologies that enterprise leaders are less familiar with. And the most obvious of those is this massively broad category of AI, right? And really, I do think organizations should be looking at how they can infuse data-driven intelligence into everything they are doing. And it's, I talk to a lot of both AI vendors and different forms of intelligent automation in different ways. And one of the things that frustrates me a little bit is that I think way too many vendors are focusing this, AI, the application of AI, on sort of the industrial age value paradigm, meaning focused on optimization. How can I reduce calls to the call center, or how can I optimize these processes? And I'm not saying that AI doesn't help there or it shouldn't be applied there, but I think that misses the much bigger bang for the buck. And that is that the experiential expectations of customers, and this applies whether you are direct to consumer, you are business to business, whether you're working through channels, it doesn't matter. All of us, because we now have Siri on our watch, and we have Alexa sitting on our desk. I always have to be careful because she perks up when I say that. And that we are becoming inundated and habituated to interacting with technology in a different way than we did just a few years ago. And so that reset of expectation is upping the ante on the level of experience that we create and deliver for our customers, and how well you use quote unquote AI. And I put it in quotes because from a technology perspective, we all know there's wildly divergent approaches. But what I think is important is from a consumer or a customer perspective, it sort of doesn't matter. What I care about is an experience that is intuitive, it is simple, and that the system knows just enough. And this is what makes it hard, right? I want it to have the data, the knowledge that I've given it of my experiences, of the information I provided about myself, to make this interaction, this engagement seamless and as easy as possible. But I don't want it to cross that line into the creepy factor where it's like, you've been spying on me and you know all the stuff that I don't want you to know.
Yeah.
And from a technology and a data standpoint, that's actually a pretty tough, pin to balance on. And so trying to get that right, I think, is the most critical part. And I think the trick, in my opinion, is to bring a customer journey centric viewpoint to it. And by the way, this all applies just as equally to the employee journey, right? So
Yeah.
I use experience. I mostly focus on the customer, but it's customer and employee because they are joined at the hip. So, looking at those journeys and understanding and asking ourselves, how can I use my data? How can I use this intelligent technology to improve that experience? And if that's my first statement and my first posture, then the efficiency and the optimization will come out as a natural byproduct, but it keeps me on the straight and narrow of making sure that I'm doing these things because they're going to serve my customer or employee first. And so I think, that's where there's just a massive amount that I think the challenge when we talk about AI. So I think this, and I hate using AI as much, applying intelligence. So that can come in the form of just smart algorithmic or even rules-based automation, as long as it is leveraging the data to do it. It also demands I have a really robust data architecture that enables that, or I'm able to collect and harvest and discriminate around that data. And then it means I need to have a set of tools. So I'm very bullish on low code type platforms, or the application or leveraging of low code type approaches across the entire technology domain, because it allows us to take the act of creation and move it closer to the point of engagement. Meaning I want to put into the hands of the people that are actually interacting with those employees or customers, the people that know what those experiential demands are. I want to put the tools in their hands as close to that as a point as I can, where they can transform that experience as much as possible on their own. Now, we could talk for an hour about the nuances of how to do that, but so any technology that is going to help me do that is the stuff that I'm most interested in right now.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. So, Charles, since you spoke a lot of the new digital experiences and how they sort of completely revolutionize or change how customer or employee interactions are being done. So definitely, I mean, chatbots are one of the technologies or aspects that come into play, especially as let's say, a part of AI or natural language processing as such. So on that part, what do you think about the efficacy of chatbot plus a live chat kind of a system, especially when you very rightly put it that it has to be a balance of not being creepy or weird, as well as like not frustrating the user as well. So do you think that this is kind of a perfect balance with live chat and chatbots?
So we're actually doing a piece of research right now on conversational AI to sort of examine this very issue. I think so. It is fascinating. I think a lot of the vendors in this space are not distinguishing between a quote unquote chatbot or conversational AI. I actually do. It's sort of academic, but I mostly am saying it from the perspective that historically chatbots were very much rules based, maybe with some basic algorithms in it. And I actually think they had a pretty negative impact on the experience. They were nothing but a glorified search tool, and actually didn't deliver on the promise. I do believe that conversational AI, specifically when we are talking about things that are using, natural language, not just processing, but natural language understanding, specifically when we get into things like intent recognition and context switching, where you can start having what feels like a real conversation. I think as we see that technology continue to evolve and develop there, it's going to be truly transformative. The fact of the matter is, I'm a perfect use case, right? I'm both old enough and young enough. I'm not so old that I'm a baby boomer who is completely resistant to any form of technology, but I am old enough that, it's not this natural thing. So like, I hate picking up the phone. I despise picking up the phone and calling somebody. Ironically, though, I will quote unquote chat with a computer, or I will potentially chat, verbally with a computer, because I think that it's a faster way to get me to my answer. The reason I hate, picking up the phone and calling is I know I get stuck in hold hell, and it takes me forever to get to somebody. It's all about how I can get to my answer as fast as possible. And so I think done effectively, it can be truly transformative. The trick is it has to be conversational. It has to not fool me into thinking I'm talking to a human. That's a death knell, but it has to feel like it. And I think this is, we talked about fine lines that have to be balanced when it comes to conversational AI / chatbots, and I'll one other piece I guess I want to address there in a second. But the trick is, as humans, we don't want to be fooled into thinking we're talking to a human when we're in fact talking to a robot of some sort of piece of technology. That makes us feel stupid. It kicks off a whole bunch of things within our brain that leads to negative outcomes. That said, we want nothing more than to have a very human-like conversation with a piece of technology that can in fact help us. And so the challenge with that is that means doing things like persistent experiences, knowing that, hey, I chatted with you 2 days ago, and 2 days ago I had a problem with this particular issue I was dealing with, and that I shouldn't have to start over. I should be able to, just like I talk to a human, go, hey, the problem I was having 2 days ago, I'm still having it. The thing that you told me to do didn't work. That's something I would have with a human being. I want to be able to have that same type of conversational dialogue, not because I think it's a human, because that's how my brain naturally works. And that's why I want to interact. And so I think the trick is to find that balance point where you have enough. And if there's, to me, the gap I'm seeing in most of the market right now is that there's plenty of persistence around transactional persistence, right? I know that you called in and this is what we did, or this is what your account balance is, or whatever. But I'm not seeing a whole lot of persistent experiential persistence where I understand that you had this interaction and you were frustrated 2 days ago, or, oh, we thought we were happy, right? Being able to understand that experiential context, I think is critical, and what's really going to be the thing that ultimately transforms it. The last little piece for me is, I think what's interesting in the chatbot versus conversational AI conversation is that we're seeing it sort of expand, meaning it used to historically be omni or unichannel. It was pretty much a text-based interaction and typically through a website or whatever. And now we're seeing that it is being persistent through multiple text-based channels. So maybe in Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp or, whatever. But we're also seeing that the same technology at its core is being applied through, IVRs or through different voice type interactions and engagements. And increasingly, I think we're going to see acceptance and adoption of actual avatars for all those same reasons, right? An avatar has depending on who you listen to, somewhere 70 to 80% of our human communication happens non-verbally. And so having an avatar that can communicate that, and right now it's extremely kludgy for almost any of the technologies I've seen, but I think we're going to get there. And I think that ultimately we as humans are going to adopt that because, again, that's our natural form of communication, that we interact wholly, how we hear, the intonation, the facial expressions, all of those elements. And once we get past, kind of cross that paradigm and get comfortable with it, I think that's what we're ultimately going to want, which leads to the last thing. I think in order for conversational AI or chatbots or whatever term you want to use to ultimately be effective, is it also has to then be omni-channel, where it is persistent, persistent experiential context extends across channels. It doesn't matter if I'm doing it via chat or if I'm picking up the phone and calling, or if I'm interacting with some kind of a video avatar, that it remains aware of all those interactions, which actually allows this technology to supersede the type of interactions I would have with a normal human, because in a normal human type interaction, I'm dealing with 17 different people, none of which you know what I talked about with the last one. But in this example now, I can maintain the persistence of that experience, which actually will improve it overall. So I think there's a lot of promise for it. I think the trick is being focused on the right things as we move forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, you sort of hit the nail right on the head in the sense that these systems do have all the data. I think as technologies evolve, it will be all about stitching them together and complete the experience over time, over channels, and like matching up to the expectations of what users have. Right. So definitely, I think, I mean, even we have a lot of faith and put all our efforts in like making sure the experiences match up, because mostly what we have observed is people come with a lot of expectations. I mean, they expect chatbots to be like close to God in terms of like what's the weather here and
Yeah,
what is this, what is that, and so it's really difficult matching those expectations and setting the context of the conversations that it is actually trained or set for, I think.
absolutely.
On that note, I mean, on a more general level, since we are talking about transformations and technology, so what do you think is probably the most impactful technology to have sort of come into the business world as such?
You know, I saw this question in the advance, and it's the one that sort of stumped me at first because the challenge. I mean, it's easy to talk about, whatever, whether it's AI or some of the stuff like Tesla's doing, and I mean, there's these amazing innovations across the spectrum. But what I think is important is that it sort of doesn't matter. And what I mean by that is I remember you may not be old enough. A lot of these people listening may not be old enough, but there was a networking platform called Novell back in the 80s and early 90s. And I was one of the very first certified Novell engineers way back in the day. And it was the revolutionary technology of the time because it started truly changing how you could interconnect these systems, and it changed the game for what you could do with a PC. Right before, it was you had these big giant mainframes and mid-range computers, then you had the PC, but the PC was like a toy because it was this little standalone thing. Once you could start connecting them, it started truly changing the world. But here's the deal: it was built on the technology that came before it, and every single thing we do now is built on the technology that came before it. And I think what's interesting in the tech world is we're always looking for this big breakthrough, and the reality is it's pretty much a ghost. It doesn't really exist. Everything we do is really this incremental. Sometimes it looks like it because all these incremental improvements happen, in the dark where nobody can see them happening in some back room, and then all of a sudden they seem to explode onto the surface. But the reality is that it's always the sort of incremental growth. And my audience, the people I am always focused on talking to, are enterprise leaders. And so as I contemplated this question, my answer to an enterprise leader or an executive is don't wait for the next breakthrough. Don't be worrying about where this new technology is going to come from. The focus needs to be on the business problems that you are trying to solve and how you organizationally can incrementally improve your capability consistently. The consistency of the improving of your capabilities is what's ultimately going to make the difference. And for that matter, set you up to be able to be prepared to take advantage of whatever that quote unquote breakthrough technology is when it finally appears. So, the short answer is I don't think there is one. I think it's the accumulation of all of this that has now leading to this explosion of not only things like productivity, but an explosion in how we are able to re-envision these experiences.
Correct. And that's very true. I mean, all technology is sort of built on top of something. So yeah, things do get better, I think, and who knows what is there in the future for us. So, so that was really, I mean, a lot of insightful information, a lot of value in all the like thoughts you put in, and I'm pretty sure our viewers will really like and learn a lot from this. So thanks a lot again, Charles, for spending the time with us. It was really great to have you on this show.
Happy to join you.
Thanks. So for our audience, we'll be back with a new episode with a new expert soon. So stay tuned with us for that. And thank you for your time as well.